August 9th, 1986. Knebworth Park, Hertfordshire, England. When Freddie Mercury opened his mouth in front of 120,000 people and nothing came out, everyone watching thought Queen's final concert in England was over. But what happened in the next 60 seconds would prove that sometimes the most powerful moments in music history happen when our masks fall away completely, revealing the vulnerable human being beneath the legend. The morning of that historic day, Freddie Mercury was afraid to look at his reflection in the mirror. Something had been eating away at him for months, a private pain he hadn't shared with anyone. But that night, he had no choice. 120,000 people were waiting at Knebworth Park for what the media was calling Queen's farewell concert on English soil. What nobody knew was that behind the legendary showman's confident facade, Freddie Mercury was carrying a burden that would nearly break him in front of the entire world. Knebworth Park had become a temporary city of Queen fans when ticket sales began in late July. The 120,000 tickets sold out within minutes. This wasn't just another concert. This was history in the making, the Magic Tour's final stop, and everyone who secured a ticket knew they were about to witness something extraordinary. The Magic Tour had been grueling beyond anything Queen had experienced before. 42 concerts across Europe, playing to hundreds of thousands of people night after night. Queen was at the absolute peak of their powers, their performances more spectacular than ever. But Freddie was 40 years old, and the exhaustion was becoming unbearable. But exhaustion wasn't the only thing weighing on Freddie's mind as the final concert approached. In mid-July 1986, something devastating happened in Freddie's personal life. Someone close to him, someone who had been battling illness, suddenly took a turn for the worse. People who worked closely with him noticed an immediate and profound change in the man they thought they knew. Peter Freestone, Freddie's longtime personal assistant, recalled years later how different Freddie became during those final weeks of the tour. In the second half of July, Freddie became very quiet, Peter remembered. He was always so vibrant and energetic, the life of every room he entered. But suddenly he withdrew into himself. Something was consuming him from the inside, and we could all see it even though he never spoke about it. Brian May noticed it too during rehearsals. Freddie spoke less between songs. His famous wit seemed dulled by an invisible weight that none of them understood. But every night when he stepped onto the stage, he transformed back into the flamboyant performer the world expected. The stage had become his refuge, the only place where he could escape the grief that was eating him alive. Roger Taylor would reveal years later just how much Freddie was struggling during those final concerts. He was tired, yes, but not just physically, Roger said. Something was consuming him emotionally, something deep and painful. But we didn't press him about it. Freddie was intensely private about his personal life, and we respected that. We had no idea just how much he was carrying. By early August, as the tour approached its finale at Knebworth Park, the press had built it up as Queen's farewell concert. Freddie spent those final days at his London home, increasingly withdrawn and unreachable even to those closest to him. Jim Hutton, Freddie's partner, described how profoundly different Freddie had become in those final weeks before Knebworth. He slept constantly, barely ate, and seemed lost in thoughts he couldn't share, Jim recalled. When I tried to talk to him about what was wrong, he'd just say he was tired and would rest after Knebworth. But I could see something deeper, a profound sadness that went far beyond exhaustion. There was raw pain there, but Freddie wasn't ready to share it, not even with me. The morning of August 9th would test everything Freddie thought he knew about himself. Freddie woke before dawn that morning. Jim prepared breakfast, but Freddie couldn't eat. He sat drinking tea, staring out the window at the gray London sky, and said quietly, "It's going to be a difficult day." The drive to Knebworth Park was eerily quiet. Normally, Freddie would be animated before concerts, telling stories, making jokes, keeping everyone entertained. But that day he gazed silently out the window, lost in thoughts he couldn't share with anyone. When they arrived at Knebworth Park and Freddie saw the scale of the production, even he seemed overwhelmed. Massive light towers stretched toward the sky. Enormous video screens flanked the stage. Special platforms had been built for Brian's guitars. Queen's concerts were always sophisticated, but this was on another level entirely. Freddie stood looking at the stage for a long moment, taking a deep breath that seemed to carry the weight of his entire career. Then he headed straight to his dressing room without speaking to anyone. What Freddie saw in the mirror that afternoon would haunt him forever. In his dressing room, Freddie was alone with his thoughts and his grief. He stood before the mirror, examining his face before applying his stage makeup. For just a moment, he wasn't Freddie Mercury, the legendary rock star who commanded stadiums around the world. He was simply Farrokh Bulsara, a 40-year-old man who felt tired, lost, and profoundly alone. He thought about the person he'd lost in July, feeling that familiar stab of grief pierce his chest. He wondered if he had anything authentic left to give these 120,000 people who had come to see him perform. But then he began the transformation ritual that had sustained him for 2 decades. White tank top, tight jeans, yellow jacket, makeup applied with practiced precision. The mask was in place, the performer ready to emerge. But underneath that carefully constructed facade, the emptiness remained. By 8 o'clock that evening, 120,000 people were about to witness something that had never happened in Freddie Mercury's entire career. The crowd that had gathered at Knebworth Park that evening was unlike anything most of them had ever seen. Fans of every age had made the pilgrimage. Teenagers who had grown up with Queen. Families who had introduced their children to the music. Groups of friends who had followed the band for decades. Some had camped overnight just to secure spots near the front of the massive field. The energy was electric with anticipation, but tinged with melancholy. Everyone sensed they were witnessing the end of an era, though none of them could have predicted just how profound and emotional this final performance would become. Backstage, the 4 members of Queen gathered for their pre-show meeting, a ritual they had performed before every concert for years. Brian looked at Freddie and asked, "Ready?" "Freddie?" Freddie flashed that famous smile and replied, "Always ready, darling, always ready." But his voice cracked slightly and his eyes betrayed a weariness deeper than anyone realized. The concert began perfectly. The lights dimmed, sending 120,000 people into rapturous screaming. The Queen logo appeared on the massive screens flanking the stage. Freddie made his entrance with that characteristic confident stride that had made him a legend. "Good evening, Knebworth." His voice carried across the vast space like a sonic wave, and the crowd erupted in response. The first 4 songs went flawlessly. One Vision, Tie Your Mother Down, In the Lap of the Giz, 7 Seas of Rye. Freddie was hitting every note perfectly, his stage presence commanding as ever. Running across the platform, engaging with every section of the enormous crowd. Then came the 5th song of the evening, A Kind of Magic. This song was different from the high-energy rock anthems that had preceded it. Slower, more emotional, deeply personal. Freddie would sit at his grand piano, playing gentle chords, while singing in that voice that could convey both power and heartbreaking vulnerability. What happened in the next 60 seconds would become the most important moment in Queen's history and change forever how we think about the relationship between performers and their audiences. The music began beautifully. Soft, gentle piano notes drifted across the silent stadium like a lullaby. Freddie placed his hands on the keys and started playing the familiar introduction, his fingers moving automatically through a piece he had performed countless times. The crowd fell silent in anticipation. 120,000 people waiting to hear one of their favorite songs performed by the man who created it. The moment came for Freddie to begin singing. He opened his mouth, ready to deliver the first line with his usual confidence and power. He sang the first note clearly, his voice carrying across the vast space. He sang the second note without any problem, everything proceeding normally. When the third note was supposed to come, he stopped. The words weren't there. His mind had gone completely blank. The lyrics to his own song, a song he had written, a song he had performed hundreds of times, had simply vanished from his memory as if they had never existed. Pure, overwhelming panic, unlike anything he had ever experienced on stage, washed over him. Freddie tried again, opening his mouth with desperate hope, but nothing emerged except silence. The music continued playing around him like a soundtrack to his nightmare. Brian's guitar provided gentle accompaniment. Roger maintained a soft rhythm on the drums, but Freddie was silent, staring at the piano keys as if they might provide the answers he desperately needed. 10 seconds passed, 20 seconds. Freddie remained frozen at the piano, his mind a complete void. The grief from July crashed over him like a tsunami. The exhaustion, the pain, the profound sadness he had been carrying for weeks. It all converged in this moment, overwhelming every other thought, drowning out everything except the sound of his own heartbeat. The moment when the crowd began to notice something was terribly wrong was like watching a wave of realization spread across an ocean of people. People in the front row started looking at each other with growing concern. Something was happening that had never happened before in a Freddie Mercury performance. The confidence, the theatrical presence, the absolute command of the stage. It had all evaporated in an instant, leaving behind a vulnerable human being who looked completely lost. Freddie was still staring at the piano, his hands motionless on the keys. Brian turned his head, noticing that the vocals hadn't started when they should have. Concern flickered across his face as he realized something was seriously wrong. Roger slowed his drumming, almost to a stop. John let his bass fade away. The music began to die like a car running out of gas. Then Freddie did something that shocked everyone at Knebworth Park. He covered his face with his hands. In that gesture, 120,000 people saw something they had never seen before. Freddie Mercury, vulnerable and human. For the first time in his 20-year career in front of the largest audience he had ever faced, he had forgotten his own words. But it was more than forgotten lyrics. He had lost himself completely. There was only pain, exhaustion, and an overwhelming sense of emptiness that threatened to swallow him whole. Was this how it would end? Was Queen's final concert going to conclude with their frontman breaking down on stage? The silence stretched on, becoming more unbearable with each passing second. Then, from somewhere in the front rows, a miracle began. A single male voice, young and strong, began singing the words to A Kind of Magic, clearly, loudly, with complete conviction and love. Freddie lifted his head, searching desperately for the source of that voice. In the front row, a young man was standing with his hands cupped around his mouth, singing Freddie's song back to him, with tears streaming down his face. Freddie stared at him in complete amazement, unable to process what was happening. Then something beautiful began to happen, something that would be talked about for decades. The person standing next to that young man joined in, then another person, then 10 people, then 100, then 1,000, then 10,000. Within moments, all 120,000 people at Knebworth Park were singing A Kind of Magic in perfect unison, their voices combining to create something that transcended any individual performance. It was like watching 120,000 individual hearts become one heart, beating in perfect rhythm. Freddie sat at the piano, listening in complete shock and overwhelming gratitude. 120,000 people were singing to support him, to lift him up, to remind him that he wasn't alone in his pain. The notes weren't perfect, the timing was imprecise, but the emotion was absolutely real and more powerful than anything he had ever experienced in 2 decades of performing. Brian May wiped tears from his eyes, unable to believe what he was witnessing. Roger Taylor put down his drumsticks and just listened to the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. John Deacon bowed his head, moved beyond words. Everyone on stage was crying, overwhelmed by the pure love flowing from the audience. A tear fell from Freddie's eyes, then another. He looked from the piano to the crowd, his hands trembling with emotion. But slowly, gradually, a smile began to form on his face. This crowd, these 120,000 strangers, were sending him the most powerful message imaginable. You're not alone. We're here. We're with you. We love you ethically as you are. Freddie took a deep breath and stood up from the piano bench. The crowd was still singing, their voices creating a wave of sound that seemed to physically lift Freddie's spirits and heal his broken heart. He walked slowly to the microphone, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, and looked out at the sea of people who had just rescued him from his darkest moment. Then slowly he began singing with them. His voice was broken at first, cracked with emotion and vulnerability. But it was there, the words had come back. The pain was still present, but he wasn't carrying it alone anymore. He had 120,000 voices supporting him, holding him up, reminding him why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. When the song ended, the stadium fell completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop across those vast fields. Freddie leaned into the microphone and whispered just two words: "Thank you." Those two words contained everything: gratitude, vulnerability, recognition, love. They were the most honest words he had ever spoken on stage. The crowd exploded in response: applause, screams, tears, joy. Everyone was standing, sending Freddie a unified message. We love you. You're our hero. You're human. And that's why we love you even more. Brian came to Freddie's side and touched his shoulder gently. When Freddie turned to him, the two men embraced like brothers who had just survived something incredible together. Roger was applauding from behind his drum kit, his eyes wet with tears. John was smiling quietly but with profound understanding. In that moment, on that stage, with those 120,000 people, history was being written in the most beautiful way possible. Freddie took the microphone again, and this time his voice was stronger, renewed by the love he had just experienced. "Shall we continue?" he asked the crowd, his voice filled with new energy and purpose. The response was thunderous. The next song began, hammer to fall, powerful, hard, energetic. Freddie was reborn. He was running across the stage, jumping, shouting, performing as if nothing had happened. But something profound had happened. A miracle had occurred. The connection between performer and audience had been redefined forever. The final song was "We Are the Champions," and it became more than just a song. It became a celebration of human resilience and the power of community. Freddie stood at the stage edge, extended the microphone to the crowd, and let them sing. All 120,000 people sang in one voice: "We are the champions." They weren't singing about victory and competition. They were singing about the victory of love over despair, of community over isolation, of human connection over loneliness. Freddie listened, smiled, and cried. This wasn't his goodbye. This was his thank you. When the concert ended, the four members of Queen embraced backstage in silence. Peter Freestone recalled that Freddie was very quiet afterward, sitting alone in his dressing room for nearly an hour. He cried for a long time, Peter remembered. Then he looked up at me and said, "They saved me. Those people brought me back."